What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls PvP. Alright guys, we're back at it for part 2 of the two-part series that I like to title Just Another Day in the Forest. Alright, now if you guys have been following from part 1, part 1 we used my strength build variation, wherein we used a good number of strength weapons. Right, we didn't really do too much PvP with the Black Knight Halberd, unlike some of my previous videos, because I just so happen to have a lot of love for the Black Knight Halberd. I think it's an awesome weapon. And this is basically my 40-40 variation. Now, this build has 40 strength, 40 dex, and it actually has, I think it's like 15 intelligence, just to put in the magic weapon and the hidden weapon, and chameleon whenever I want to, and it only has 2 attunement slots. Now, why did I get magic weapon? Because I need the buff? No, not really. I don't need it at all, because I have pretty good stats. Now, to the extent that you guys are kind of new to the game, let me kind of explain something to you about diminished returns. The reason why it really makes no sense to increase your stats past 40 unless you're dealing with some of the strength weapons that will that have a minimum requirement of at least 40. It's because of diminished returns. In other words, you will get your sharpest, your steepest increases in strength and anything under 40. 41 and above, I mean, the increase is so minimal that it's not even worth investing more points. So in other words, you may get a guy who in their mind they'll say, okay, well, I have 40 dexterity, so 50 dexterity will make my katana super strong. No, you basically wasted 10 points, because those 10 soul levels might increase your AR probably about 3 points, right? So when you just think about the cost of those 10 soul levels versus 3 or 4 points in AR, it's just simply not worth it. So that's kind of like diminished returns. You guys can kind of look up the actual definition on the internet if you like, but that's basically what it is, to sum it up. You get sharp increases up until a certain point, and once you get to the point of diminished returns, I mean, your increases are so minimum that you're almost flatlining, right? You're almost flatlining. Okay, so toward the end of part 1, we were talking about the Japanese players, and we're talking about the differences and so-called definition of, and actually the difference in definition of so-called competitive gameplay. Right, and I was basically pointing out that I did not want dedicated servers. Right, I like the servers the way they are on PlayStation. Now, a lot of people, like I said before, they'll have you think that, you know, the only time that they experience lag is when they play against Japanese players. I think that's an exaggeration. I think they may lose a lot to Japanese players, so they like to blame it on lag, right? And I think they lose a lot mainly because they use, well, at least from my personal experience, some of them use some extreme techniques. But the thing is, it's not extreme when you look at the game for what it is. It's only extreme when you play from a competitive PvP perspective. Now, what do I mean by that? From what I have noticed, you have 3 types of Dark Souls PvPers. You have the guys who basically only like to 1v1, right? They kind of like to weigh themselves against other players during a 1v1. And this is something that you might kind of find on, let's just say, Twitch, for example. A lot of those guys, when you really pay attention to them, you know, the Dark Lord Sins. I can't really say Bushido, because Bushido kind of force hunts too. He doesn't do it that often, but some of these other guys, maybe Lance, you know, basically all they do is 1v1s. Now, there may be some times where they're streaming or they're PvPing and I don't see. I'm just talking about based upon what I've seen. Most of them do a lot of formal matchups, 1v1s. So when you listen to their opinions on tactics, right, a lot of them will call almost everything cheap, right? Like case in point, you'll have one particular streamer that if, you have 53 poise, if you don't get stunned by a hit, they'll just say, oh, he has high poise. It's kind of like, dude, okay, I mean, I made sacrifices in endurance to allow me to have more poise than 31, right? But see, they look at things differently because some of these guys are a little more competitive. Or they'll say something like, well, you backstab more than once. Well, the reason why they look at things that way is because they're more competitive. But that, like I said before, will be your first type of player. Some of these guys who mainly only like to do 1v1s and they basically measure their own skill based upon other competitive guys. Then you have the type of players who only do random invasions. Like, that's all they do. These type of guys don't think anything about any formalities. Now, they may know about them. They may do them every now and then. They're aware of them. But they're not focused on doing all these formalities. They're not focused on all these things that competitive players are focused on. They're just focused on, you guys notice that? 1,032 on a riposte, and that's with a 40-40 halberd. That's pretty impressive. Like I said before, they may be aware of the formalities, but do they care about them? No, and why should they? Because they're doing random invasions. Their goal may not necessarily be to improve their tactics. And the last thing they're thinking about is weighing their own skill against other people. They're just trying to kill. It's a random invader, right? And basically, I think they probably have the most fun out of everybody. And then you have players like me. I would be the third type of player. And this is just based upon my own observations. The third type of person kind of does both, right? Wherein in some instances I will lead more toward the formal matchups, and in other instances, I'll lean more toward the random invasions. Now, the reason why I kind of have an open mind with regard to certain things and certain tactics is because I play both, right? I'm not one of those guys that only do competitive play. So, in other words, if I see that I'm fighting against a tank and I lose, I won't make an excuse and say, oh, you see, look at him. He doesn't have any skill. He just poison through everything. No, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, he wasted, not wasted. He just sacrificed either a lot of endurance or he's sacrificing a roll speed. Because, okay, he may have a lot of poise, but that guy can't even fast roll or Darkwood Gray Ring. So, okay, it is what it is. And that's only because I face so many people during random invasions that it doesn't really make me a difference. Whereas some of the competitive guys, they'll basically look down on you. If you have 53 poise, they'll basically say, oh, he only won because he has 53 poise. Okay, why? Because I want to make the investment? Okay, it is what it is. In other words, you're going to take a loss somewhere. So let's just say you're one of these 32 poise guys and you may have a little bit of endurance. Okay, you may have a lot of vitality, especially if you're a katana guy, because it is not uncommon for a katana user to have at least 2,000 in vitality. Because think about it, all your scaling goes into dexterity, so you don't need to make any strength investments. And if you're one of these 31 poise guys, you can basically flip around with 32 poise, right? And if you have 32 poise, that's not a high, you don't really need a lot of endurance. So if you only need to make an investment in dexterity, and you don't need a lot of endurance because you're usually Darkwood Grain Raining with, 31 or 36 poise, the rest of your points can go into vitality. So you're almost a vitality gouge. So this is how I approach things. I say, okay, he may have 70 poise, but he can't fast roll. So I'll just have to use my mobility to my advantage. whereas he's a little slower, and I have to take into consideration that he can tank certain attacks, right? So that's really what I mean by the different types. You'll have the competitive player who will basically, because all they do is basically compete in 1v1s, they almost look down on everything. If you have too much poison, they'll say, oh, you only did it because you have poise. If you have high vitality, then they'll find something to say about, oh, you have 85 vitality. They'll always have something to say about something, right? And this is one of the reasons why I kind of stay away from formal matchups unless I'm doing a battle of the builds or something like that, because I just want to play and have fun. I don't want to hear, you only won because you have 53 poise, or you only won because you fast roll. I don't want to hear that, dude. Every build have their own advantage. And over time, that's what I've come to realize. Every build has its advantage. If you make an investment of 50 points into intelligence, you have strong castings, but your weapons are kind of weak. I mean, unless you use the Moonlight Greatsword, because that weapon is pretty strong. But to the extent that you are using elemental weapons, your attacks are kind of weak, right? Because those elementals were nerfed. If you, I don't know, if you're a fast roller, you may have had to sacrifice on your poise or something else. So it is what it is. That's what makes each particular build special, because they specialize and focus on one or maybe two different things. Alright, so this is why I don't really have hang-ups with high poise or, something like that, because I'm not just a competitive player and I'm not just a random invader. I do both. So when I win or lose, I consider, things from a formal matchup perspective and a random invasion perspective. So I don't really have too many hang-ups, right? So this is why, in most cases, I kind of prefer random invasions. I can play however I like without someone sending me comments about, well, you did this and you did. I really don't want to hear that, dude. I just want to have fun. Right, because it is very rare, and as a matter of fact, anyone who have had 1v1s with me will tell you I'm not going to complain. I mean, if you beat me, you beat me. Now, I might have thoughts within myself, right, but that's only because, who likes to lose? Right, that's almost a natural thing. Who really likes to lose? Now, there was an instance where, one in particular, where I kind of got sour, because this guy basically, and actually, the thing I didn't like is that the guy is an awesome player, but he basically did the same move like over and over and over again. It's like, dude, you're better than that. Why do you keep trying to do the same move combination over and over? And actually, it wasn't that the combination was bad, but it was basically a combination that, once you get stuck in it, it will knock off like 1,300 damage. Alright, so outside of that, it is very rare that I would make a complaint about anything. And that's because I'm not all competitive. And because I'm not all competitive, I already expect people to have high poise, or I expect people to have other things, because I do a lot of random invasions, right? Because you guys can see, basically, from as often as I am in the forest. I'm in the forest all the time. Right, that's another one of the reasons why I don't have hang-ups about higher levels, right? Because I've visited certain streams, and basically, if you're not on the same soul level as they are, they'll knock you, So in other words, it's not that they lost because you outplayed them. They'll say that you lost because, you're at a higher level. So in other words, we can both have 45 in vitality, for which like 95% of my builds only have 45 in vitality. But if you're 100 and I'm 115, they'll basically just knock you down and just say, well, you're a 115, that's why I lost. No, dude, because in most cases the only difference is I may have more endurance, but the more endurance has nothing to do with the abilities, right? Because think about it, we both have the same amount of of vitality. We both have 45, and we both may have a 2840 build. But they'll knock you all together. They'll just say, well, the only reason why I lost is because your levels are higher. But see, I think that's one of the main reasons why the developers of Dark Souls created the windows that they did in some instances. Because they realized that within a certain window is not that much of a difference, mainly due to diminished returns. And I think that's why the brackets are the way they are, because of diminished returns. So, you know, like I said before, I don't really have too many hang-ups. You know, if I'm a level 100 and, you know, you're a 120 and you beat me, I won't try to knock your skills down and just say, well, you'll only beat me because you're a 120. Because in other words, if I'm not going to complain when I beat you when I'm a 100 and you're a 120, then why should I complain when you beat me? Right? Because in other words, the thing is two-sided. I don't complain when I win, so why should I complain when you win? Especially when you're doing, you know, especially when you're doing red soapstone summon sign summons, right? Because you can only, now we're not talking about these guys who are level 700 and they're just waiting for signs to pick up. We're not talking about that. But what I'm saying is, if you're like, hey dude, let's have some matches, and I'm like, well, I mean, I'm not switching builds, I'm 125. And you say, oh, okay, well, I'm cool, I'm 100. Okay, well, guess what? So what, dude? I mean, it should just cause for you to take certain things into consideration when it comes to your tactics. Because this has happened to me on a number of occasions. Someone will message me, hey dude, let's have some matches. And I might be on my level 100 build, and I don't want to change. He may be on a level 120 build, and I won't say, you know, depending upon what's going on, I won't really care, especially if you tell me in advance. You're like, well, dude, I mean, I don't have any 100s. I only have a 130. I say, okay, well, I mean, that's not that much of a difference. Why? Because the only thing that you can really benefit over me is maybe endurance and maybe vitality. But when you look at vitality, as a matter of fact, I think with the Ring of Favor and Protection, the most vitality you can have is somewhere around 2250. And that's not when when you're not using the Mask of the Mother. And if 2250 is the most that you can have, think about it. Most of my builds cap off at 1708. The difference between 1708 and 2250 is not really that much. I think it's like 500, right? Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And if that's the difference, if the difference is 500, let's just look at, practically speaking, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a two-handed claymore hit, or a two-handed, you know, that's basically what we're talking about. We're not talking about a difference of 4 or 5 hits. Even if you have 99 vitality, and I'm soul level 100 and you're soul level 130, at the end of the day, there are sacrifices being made, right? You can only sustain one additional two-handed greatsword hit than me. So the difference is not even really that significant, and I think that's one of the main reasons why they nerfed the Mask of the Mother. Right? So, like I said before, there's 3 types of PvPers in my opinion: the formal matchup guy, the random invasion guy, and the guy like me. So this is why I don't really have too many hang-ups during 1v1 matches, right? Because I take a lot of things in consideration based upon my own experiences. Alright, so this is pretty much it with my 2-part series. And actually this last match I thought was extremely interesting. Now you have this guy, this hack and slash guy with his phantom. And actually I forgot to put on my wolf ring, so I was in trouble. Now, you see how bouted he is, and actually that's a funny expression. But in other words, you see how bouted he is with his phantom, right? He's going off with his little Zweihander and his other buddy with his little high-speed gold tracer. The funny thing about it is, later on, this guy is seriously going to disconnect. I guess he got so upset that he disconnected. I say all that to say, listen guys, don't be a spoil sport, especially if you're a ganker, because that makes you look worse. It's bad enough that you're ganking, and I'm not saying there's anything bad about ganking, because ganking is fun. But what I'm saying is, dude, if you're going to gank, don't be a spoil sport when you lose. Just take your loss and be done with it. Because if you're not going to be a spoil sport when you're winning 2v1s, don't be a spoil sport when you lose in 2v1s. Alright guys, you guys can go ahead and watch him try to get a quick buzz off his Estus, because he sure is going to continue to drink it. Alright, well, until next time, Martyrs Brigade is